Good morning and welcome to another edition of Account-Based Friday. We've got a special guest joining us from the Washington, D.C. area, Sonita Reese, CEO. And CEO has a couple different meanings, but in this case, the Chief Encouragement Officer. We're going to hear all about that in a moment. Just logistics-wise, my co-host Meg and I, we were trying to figure out how long we've been doing these conversations. We think it was 3 years of weekly conversations with thought leaders throughout the industry around sales and marketing best practices. This one is going to be a unique topic. Today, we're going to be talking about work-life harmony and burnout with the holidays. We thought it was a super appropriate conversation to be having. Just as a reminder, in the upper corner, as I'm looking at my screen, and I think the camera reverses it, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a QR code that'll bring you to those videos. There's close to 300 videos out there on best practices. If there's a specific question that you have for Meg or I, we could certainly point you to the right direction. There's a ton of great content out there. We would encourage you to like and subscribe. And just by way of introduction, both Meg and I are now in a consultative capacity to other organizations. We've both been former CMOs, and we've rolled around in a lot of the different day-to-day aspects of sales and marketing, go-to-market strategy. Meg's had far more experience than I have had, both at Serious Decisions and at Gartner. And I've been doing this now for about 10 years after being a CMO, also for 10 years. My hero is Jeff Black. So that's the long and short of it. We're going to jump into our poll here, our weekly poll. And this week's poll was relative to a conversation that we were having of, have you noticed any signs of burnout? And if so, what have you felt the most? And I had selected feeling less able to succeed. And I kind of reflected that back, Meg. This was your poll. The reason I selected that was I'm hearing that a lot from my clients of kind of this phenomenon of grow 20%, but invest 1% to 2% more in 2025. And so a lot of people, I think, are feeling pinched in that ability to succeed. And I won't kid you, including our own agency at times, I've even felt that too. Like, holy cow, what just happened here in 2024 versus, say, 2022? But I do think better times are ahead. But anyway, that was my reaction to that poll. Meg, what was your perspective here?
John, you and I had the same answer for the exact same reason. And I reflected on my own work experience too. I think I can tell when I'm starting to hit a bad place or get into a bad place when I start feeling really negative and I find reasons why I'm going to fail and why things won't go right. I start, catastrophizing, and that's not my normal mode. I'm generally speaking an optimist, annoyingly so. If you ask some people, but when my natural optimistic nature takes a back seat to the one that says there's no way you can do that, the one with imposter syndrome, that's when I know I need to take a break and figure out what's happening. And I think I hear that with a lot of people, to your point, John, right now. I think this time of year causes a lot of folks to reflect on things that went well or things that didn't. And sometimes we can spend a little too much time on the things that didn't and not enough time on the things that did. But that's not to say it's that person's fault. There's a lot of things happening in the world in general, in the business world, that can cause us to be, I think, all of the things on this list, which I think is why the poll landed where it did. And that's why I'm really excited, Sonita, that you're here with us today at this time. Because I think going into the holidays, it is a moment of reflection. It also is a moment of just a lot to do, both business-wise and personally for a lot of folks, and with a lot of pressure that comes with it for everything to go just right. And that can lead many people, I think, into a negative place. And I've been a fan of your work. So folks know, Sonita and I were colleagues at Serious Decisions a while back. And I've been a huge fan of her work since she left Serious Decisions and has pursued, I think, a really, really interesting path. And I won't do it justice, but I think Chief Encouragement Officer might be my new favorite C-level title. And Sonita, I would love for you, one, to comment on our poll, but two, tell us a little bit about the journey you've been on and how you're helping professionals manage themselves, help their teams with this really, really critical concept of burnout.
Yes. So thanks, Megan. And thank you, John, for having me. This is just such a delight. And a nice antidote to the things that we're seeing on the poll. So, quick comment on the poll. I think I chose increased negativity and cynicism. This was a couple weeks ago, and I was like, okay, I'm headed for not such a great place too. So take some extra time, but we'll jump into that and how it's not a one size simplistic solution that fits all. But just to share a little bit about my journey, yes, I had the pleasure of working with Meg at Serious Decisions. Prior to that, I was in the corporate B2B marketing and team leadership space for 18 plus years. And my career took a turn. And part of what happened is that, like many of the people listening, I had a lot of opportunities, was growing in my career, but things were fast and furious and often chronically stressful. And I'm going to come back to chronic stress as it ties into burnout later. But things kind of hit an inflection point for me once while I was driving and fell asleep with my young son in the back seat. So as a parent, that is incredibly terrifying. Thank God it was the most benign of all possible circumstances, even to the point where my little guy who was in preschool never woke up because he was asleep in his car seat. But that really shook me up and caused me to have an epiphany, which didn't lead me into my path right now, but it led me to realize, man, if I burn out and go down in flames, I'm going to take down not just myself, but the people I care about the most with me. And so what that led me to was not, the heavens didn't open and there wasn't a great vision of this is what you're supposed to do next to save your family and, your career. No, but it caused me to start paying attention to these symptoms and caused me to start making some changes, first and foremost with my health and kind of my emotional well-being. Fast forward a few years and a couple more bumps in the road. I experienced burnout another time for a different reason, but that caused me to hop off that bullet train and stumble very awkwardly into entrepreneurship. Again, I didn't have this great epiphany. It was more, hey, let's build a business or let's build something and have a life that supports life instead of trying to squeeze life the other way around. So what I do now is I help entrepreneurs gain time to grow and become the leaders their teams and their businesses need so that they can build their businesses without burnout. And this is not just a feel-good thing for me. It's deeply personal, not just because of what I have experienced, but the research shows more and more people not only want a great job, they want a great life. And so they're not willing to make some of the trade-offs that 20 years ago, many people just accepted as part of the job. So I actually believe it's a strategic and advantage and an imperative for many leaders, as well as I believe leaders deserve to have a great life as well as a great business. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, Sonita, thank you for that. And I think people appreciate you sharing your story and saying, hey, we all have these moments when the universe tells us we need to do something different. But to your point, it's not the Hallmark movie version of that always, that sometimes there's a few left turns before you find the right place, and the right place evolves. So I appreciate you being open about that too. I'm sure that's why folks love working with you. You bring up a really interesting idea that I would love to explore a bit more. We hear a lot about work-life balance, and I think, judging by the eye rolls I see now when that comes up in conversation, I think it's been overused to the point of ridiculousness. But there's a reason for that. It's what do we replace it with? And you've talked about the idea of work-life harmony. What's the difference between work-life balance and work-life harmony? And why is that such a critical distinction right now?
Yes. So let me share, picture this, somebody says, hey, I need you to give me your kidney and it won't hurt. So this is a scenario where it's not going to hurt. You can just take the kidney out, continue to function, and it's all good. And they say, hey, now put it on the left side of the scale. Now the rest of you stand on the right side of the scale. In what universe does that balance? It doesn't. And that is how work and life are for us. Work is a part of our life. But there is no way, if I ceased breathing, there would be no work. So I think for too long, we've been fed this idea that you're supposed to be able to make everything outside of your 9 to 5 or your 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. work. But as awkward as that kidney example is, it doesn't. And the reason I've kind of honed in on this is as part of my kind of bounce back from burnout, figuring out what I wanted to do next. I kept trying to find work-life balance and I never could. And I thought, man, I must be really missing something. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized very few people were finding it either. Sometimes they would feel balanced, but work-life balance was a myth, really. So it doesn't mean the whole idea is flawed. It's just, I think, this idea of, the work being your and being equal to the rest of your life is flawed. So I've come to think about it as work-life harmony or work-life integration. And just to be clear, those concepts are not mine. This is not new. Even folks like Jeff Bezos have talked about that, like integrating work and life to the point where you are energized, you are optimistic, and you're healthy in pursuing building that business and building that life. And I want to be clear, because for some that could mean working X number of hours, 60 or 70 hours, because it works. It's energizing. They may not have aging parents to care for, small children, or a lot of these other demands. So it's not a number of hours, but it is a mentality. And I also believe that in some of the corporate experiences that many of my peers came out of and some that I came out of, there was a pressure that you're a different persona at work. And so we won't go into all that because I don't want to muddy the waters with some of the other conversations. But as I've come to think about it, it is really integrating your life so that work adds to it and you add to your work. And I have a small framework. If you'd let me share, I'd love to introduce that. And this is for the personal part of us. We're all human. So I'm coming at it from the human perspective of the leaders who are joining us today. And I'm happy to share, like, how do we practically also extend this to teams and in the workplace where we're talking about productivity and needing to hit targets and that kind of thing. But if you can see my little paper here, it's the Work Alive framework, which is align with purpose, live your values, identify your boundaries, verify your seasons, there's a plural on that, and embrace R&R. So work alive. Let me unpack that. The align with purpose, not all of us have a big, not all of us want to save the whales or solve hunger in a certain part of the world. But when we're clear on what we're working for, whether that's to set your family up for generational success or whatever it is, everything develops more meaning. And the studies around motivation show that having meaning and motivation is a key part of it. So automatically we add energy to that equation and that scale. The live your values is when you're clear on what you truly believe, you're able to operate in more integrity. And the same way, if you think of that kidney example on the scale, being pulled apart always frays our energy. So when you're operating in alignment with values and for yourself, but also in your workplace, which actually there is research we can talk about a little later that shows that values alignment is a key driver of burnout prevention that leaders can utilize. So live your values. Identify your boundaries, huge for many of us. I'll just raise my hand. For me, I've struggled with boundaries, both as a professional and even as a parent. So understanding not only what you need to draw a box around to uphold, but also what you need to say no to. Again, the research shows that some of the most successful entrepreneurs and CEOs in the world say no to far more than they say yes to. And if you think of your house, your apartment, wherever you're living, what does that do? Boundaries unlock the principle of protection. It allows us to keep the good in and the bad out. So identify your boundaries, verify your seasons. I won't go deep into this, but we're all out of various seasons of life. Who I am now with a high schooler and a sixth grader with aging parents, it's very different than when I was 25 out of school with free and easy, and able to stay up all night on a sixth floor and watch the sunrise to finish a presentation, right? So verify your seasons, know where you are. Don't try to, it's literally just going through get neutral about it. Where am I? Season in life. What's the season of the year? Holidays, Meg, you mentioned there's a lot of pressure in this season. Just what are the commitments and the responsibilities or desires of the season of the year? Summer has different natural rhythms than the holiday time. And then verify the season of what I have dubbed your unit. For example, if you are a accountant or a CPA at an accounting firm, you're not planning vacation probably between February and sometime in April, right? Because that's the busy season of your unit. So just know your seasons, get neutral, just use them as input, as data to assist with the other parts. And then the last one, which is embrace R&R, is very near and dear to me. And that's embrace rest and rejuvenation. Many of us don't know how to rest, and rest isn't all about sleep. I'm happy to later go in the chat and share. There's a quiz that a board certified physician created, who burnout really hard, really got into this idea of rest, and now has a whole business around this for the overstressed. And she's identified 7 types of rest. So if that's of interest, after we're done, I'll pop that link in the chat, because I think sometimes when we're really stressed and are wondering why, we just still feel so exhausted, it's helpful to understand that it may not just have to be with physical rest. So that's the Work Alive framework on a personal level. It just helps to kind of keep the focus on what it is we're working for and how we might need to uphold things that bring us energy so we can build great businesses and have a great life.
Well, a lot to unpack there. That Alive framework is fantastic. You had mentioned so much there that resonated. I was trying to think back to what I've observed, even either being myself or in clients, and I think there's 2 kind of situations that I've noticed. One in the corporate side, which I'm not part of, but I kind of observe. It seems like there's this dichotomy right now of senior leaders and then everybody else. Like the middle layer has been cut out, and it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on that senior leader to kind of perform, because not only are they managing up and over, but they're missing that middle layer, and they're having to mentor very junior people. So it puts a weird dynamic there. And then I know, even my own experience as a business owner, the temptation to work all the time is very high, because I'm in my home office, so it's easy to pop in, pop out. It's hard to turn off. And I found, as you were talking about some of the dynamics that you're going through with your own family situation, I also have my own family situation, and getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And I found myself quickly getting to that burning out point without realizing it, without the framework. I guess my question coming to you would be, are there preventative ways that you could head off kind of either of those scenarios that you would suggest for viewers that might be in one of those 2 scenarios?
Yes. And so just to honor the question, John, when you say those 2 scenarios, the second one I understand, the family, kind of the unconsciously being pulled and stretched to the point where you're feeling some of those chronic stressors. And the first situation being that of, let's say, a senior leader who has, let's call it manager responsibilities too, because of the gap.
Yes.
And I highlight that because we know, right, that the manager as a role plays such a critical function, not just in achieving goals, but we also know from a culture standpoint and retention standpoint that single role is the greatest variable, right, between people staying. So I want to honor that question. I'm gonna answer that by sharing something I learned that can apply to both, and then let me provide a perspective on each of those scenarios. So after I left the corporate world, I tried to understand why, I couldn't find work-life balance. Like, what was wrong with me? What was this burnout thing all about? And in that process, I came across some research that I'm sharing in the hopes that it might be helpful for people to use as a reflection tool. And just very briefly, this is the Maslach Burnout Inventory that was co-created by a woman named Dr. Christina Maslach and her co-founder. I believe the lady's name is Susan Jackson. And this is based on over 30 years, not just only of data, but like empirical research. So there's substance behind it. And what she found is that there are 3 dimensions of burnout. And let's just kind of share a working definition around that. And this is chronic stress, not just like I had a bad day, I was in a fender bender, but I'll get over it tomorrow, So chronic stressors. And the dimensions are like that exhaustion, and that especially emotional exhaustion. You can't really cope. You're increasingly short-tempered, like just things that wouldn't bother you. You freak out when your junior person comes and asks a simple question. The cynicism/detachment, increasing cynicism and detachment, and then the increased feelings of personal inefficacy or not being able to be personally successful, no matter what you do. So I share that because, I think the poll hits on a lot of those instances. And I have found that those 3 things just sort of helpful when I'm starting to feel this. It's like, which of these, where am I? Or if my kids are like, can't ask you anything, right? Forget it, mom. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, great. That's clear. So that's been very helpful. Just as a warning, where am I? And I offer that to people to use for themselves. Now, burnout prevention. I don't want to dishonor the question by saying, oh, there are 3 steps. It's complicated and people are different. But part of why I won't say I created this Alive framework, why it came to me is I realized I needed a way to kind of stay, in the work-life integration. As you both know, entrepreneurship can be very very stressful, right? 50+% of entrepreneurs say they burn out or more. And so going back to those different dimensions, like checking in with my purpose, honoring my values. And by that, I just mean practical. If we're not living them, it doesn't matter. For example, if you join a startup and they say, one of our top 3 values is a bias to action, but then you as a junior person take a bias to action and you're called into your manager's office and you're upbraided, that dissonance can make you feel really burnt out. So I would say for leaders, like those things, especially the values, the boundaries, and rest and recharging are really critical. And just to give people something very practical, just pay attention to what drains you and what boosts you, and build in the boosts systematically and routinely. I think that may be my number 1 tip to prevent, to help prevent burnout. And I know it's much easier said than done. The simple things normally are. So then to your second question on the family side, and this is real, our families are so precious. They might even be like the main reason, our purpose, our primary purpose. But I have seen and personally struggled with like being a martyr for that cause, which can lead you to feeling, burnt out. So to that, I would say, no matter whether you have, family responsibilities or not, understand what you need to honor, again, your values and what keeps you energized, and don't squeeze it in. Make it a priority. And by that, if I meet you and you say, oh yes, Sonita, I realized going to CrossFit 3 times a week was a priority, say, great. Let me see your calendar. And if you're open, can you show me your credit card? If you spent no money on CrossFit classes or YouTube videos, and I've only seen CrossFit classes twice on your calendar in 6 months, I'd say that's not a priority. So just very practically, like build it in, put it on your calendar. Such a boring answer, but we all know, right? What gets scheduled gets done. So build in that into your calendar, I would say. But then on the more, I would say the more of a sensitive subject, especially if we're navigating family relationships that can be really, really tense. This is not my area of expertise, but dig into some of the wonderful free resource out there on honoring boundaries, conflict, how to have really productive conversations that embrace conflict, because that's often really an underlying reason why people don't honor their boundaries and can feel burnt out. And it's hard with family because we love them, but can't always talk to them.
That is the truth. And maybe to close things out with a last question, Sonita, I think the way you've positioned burnout prevention, kind of recognizing it and also managing it, helping people manage it, is a professional skill that has become really critical to be in the leader's toolkit. And I think that's super interesting. And the idea that being part of a workplace that understands, and to use your word, honors the idea that this is an important skill and that it becomes kind of almost associated with the brand is an important part of a modern brand, or a modern brand that wants to be successful, I should say. Can you say a little bit more about the link between having emotionally intelligent leadership and developing a positive position in the market, and why that's important now more than ever?
Sure. So I'll point us to two stats. They're very recent. One is, according to a global talent survey by Mercer, 82% of professionals globally feel at risk of burnout. So it matters to your workforce, right? So if you're an emotionally intelligent leader, having the not only self-awareness for how you engage, but that this is a workplace challenge, I think it's an imperative and a no-brainer. And then the second statistic came out of a study that was sponsored by Ford that shows that over half of the people surveyed would take a decrease in salary. I believe it was up to 20% for increased quality of life, to be able to just have quality life. So I think the signs say, like, you got to pay attention. And as an emotionally intelligent leader, keeping your oxygen mask on first. You cannot model a workplace like this if you aren't practicing that. If you're sending emails at 1 a.m. and the person who's joined 2 weeks ago wakes up to answer that email because you're setting the tone. But along with that, I would say there are practical drivers and levers that this emotionally intelligent leader for this modern brand that encourages work-life harmony can pull. And this comes out of that Maslach research as well. And so maybe this is a great place to end, Megan, for me. There are 6 drivers that a leader can pull. And one is workload. I think that's one we're all, workload. That's the cause of a lot of stress. But sometimes workload is also has to do with product person fit, like in the role. So I'll just quickly list them since I know we're about out of time. Workload control, like the degree of autonomy people have in their roles. Reward, that has to do with recognition. So what kind of rewards are people getting? And it's not all financial. The 4th has to do with fairness. I think the category itself is called fairness. The 5th is community. And so that's the culture. Those are the people you're around and you're working with. And the 6th is values. Again, research shows that when people work at a place that resonates with their values, they are more engaged, which we know leads to higher productivity, right? And also it's more cost effective. So I offer that for consideration.
Oh my gosh, so much goodness in all of this. I'm so glad you were here with us today. I think this is really, really timely insight and advice. And hopefully a moment for folks to think about what they can do for themselves and their teams and their families as we go into a busy season and a busy start to a new year. No time like the present to say, what do I want to look different next time, next year at the same time? What would good look like to me? So thank you for giving us some ways to think about that and to help others and ourselves get there. John, closing thoughts?
No, this has been great. So much of this content has landed personally with me, Sonita. So thank you for joining us. And I put your LinkedIn below, but what's the best? Is that the best way to get a hold of you? Or
Yeah, that's
somebody
great. LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. You can also find me on my website, www.firstby5.com. But I'm always on LinkedIn and love connecting with people there.
Yeah, highly recommend giving Sonita a follow. She's always got great content and great perspectives. So Sonita, we thank you again so much for being here. And John, who's our guest next week?
Good question. So next week, and this will be our last week before the holiday, building on the momentum that Sonita just started here. We've got EJ Oling, who's the head of ABM and demand at 6 Sense. This will be our last conversation until January 10th. So we'll be breaking for the holiday. Looking forward to an engaging conversation about what's working, what's not working, engaging marketers. And yeah, it should be a really interesting dialogue.
Excellent. Can't wait. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Sonita, for being our guest. And John, thank you for being you.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. You guys are amazing. So
our pleasure. And
next
happy
week.
Friday, everyone.
Yeah, take care.